The "it's always the right time" deal.
Hey, want to go to Mickey D's for lunch?
Ooh, let's go now.
But it's not lunchtime yet.
If we're going to McDonald's, it's always the right time.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
There's a deal for every lunch hour at McDonald's.
And there's a classic for every craving. Mix and match 2 for just $3.50, like a McChicken, a McDouble, or a hot and spicy McChicken. Price and participation may vary. Single item at regular price. Cannot be combined with any other offer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the direct-to-video connoisseur. It's Matt here as always, and I am joined this week by a very special guest. I've got Jon from Jon Cross from the After Movie Diner Booth Talk podcast, and also your band Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, which has a new album out.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, we just released. It's not a studio album per se, but it's our 12th digitally recorded long player, as they would say.
Right. Yeah. It's still technically a long play, right? I think that's the thing. It's still an album as we think of it. I think for us that grew up with albums, I think having multiple tracks back to back that you can listen to and hear is important. I think that's it. It's a little different than nowadays a lot of times it is about the single and all of that. And I think even though we don't have the terminology for it necessarily, it's still that idea.
No, completely. I entirely make albums if there are songs on it that people want to share as the so-called hit single, which, let's be fair, is how it used to happen. People used to be making an album and then someone would come in and say, that's the single or whatever. I write an album. If you go to any of my Spotify or Bandcamp or any of those places, my thing is I write an album. So if people want to enjoy an individual song, that's up to them. To be honest, I try and do something that is a work unto itself. All the tracks kind of play into each other and share a theme. And while there are obviously like standout kind of catchy ditties, maybe, I hope people appreciate the whole thing. Although I've noticed recently because for whatever reason, I felt that this was the album to kind of really try and push the music side of my life out there into the world, as it were. I've been doing that thing of trying to submit it to blogs or record labels or whatever it is. There's a whole network of it online. It's too boring to go into right now. But all of them want the song. They all, and I kind of, and I get great feedback. They're like, oh, we really like it. And it's a great vibe and good storytelling, but, it's not for us right now. And my instinct is to go, listen to another track then. Like, if you like it, then the onus is down to me to pick one of 17 tracks that someone might like. And the frustrating thing about being a fairly eclectic songwriter, although I'm definitely within a genre of sort of folk rock singer-songwriter stuff, my music is fairly eclectic in the sense that one track could be a rock track, but one other track could be a very light, folky kind of track, and then another track altogether could be more atmospheric, and it's very difficult, therefore, for me to pick the track. What someone else would consider the single is maybe not what I would want to listen to. So, yeah, it's a minefield is basically what I should have said. But I said it in a long-winded way. But
No, I totally agree. I mean, the one thing that struck me when I was listening to some of them on, because I think it was iHeartRadio that I was able to listen to a couple before I, going to try to get it on Spotify eventually. But I was struck by the fact that, like, and I don't want to, talk about, be ageist or anything to be like, oh, people our age only do this or that. But it feels like for people our age, when it comes to music, because what's out there is not really something that we want to listen to a lot. It's like we just sort of go back into YouTube playlists of 80 songs or 90 songs and things like that. And because, music like yours, like I wouldn't have known about Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures if I didn't know you from, After Movie Diner and following you there.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, I'm hearing this and I'm thinking like, yes, this is music that I would want to listen to now. And I think that's one of the problems for bands nowadays is that there's a lot of music that people our age would want to listen to, and I don't even know necessarily it's an age thing. I think there are people that are younger than us too that are kind of sick of like the overproduced, new millennium brill building kind of stuff that music has turned into now. But it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, there's still this mentality, like thinking of Tom Petty Into the Great Wide Open, right? Where like the A&R man says, I don't hear a single, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that mindset. But I think for a lot of us, we're used to just, we were used to having our CD players, and maybe that's when it started, when you had like the 3-disc player or 5-disc or whatever, where it would shuffle between different songs or whatever. But for the most part, we were used to, you just put a CD in and you listen and you hear music, and it's, it's a band, it's a group that's putting out music that, artists that are trying to do something. It's not really like, I don't know, somebody with a message, somebody who has something that they want to tell people. And it's not overly, I don't want to say overly produced, but you know what I mean? That kind of thing where it's like, bring somebody in here, get out the hit and do it. And I think for people our age that are looking for that kind of music, something like Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, that really does the trick. And it is a shame that we don't, I think you almost have to dig yourself as a listener to find it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm actually one of the few people that will come out in support of a platform like Spotify. You hear these fat, bloated millionaire rock stars who are used to, I think there was a quote that my friend Matt Farley always says about Ringo Starr and one of the Beach Boys who wrote a song. They wrote just a song together. And I think they said something along the lines of, back in the day, we would have been able to have bought a swimming pool with this song. And as it is, we're just going to make a few cents on Spotify. And I kind of say to myself, should anyone be able to buy a swimming pool with just one song, let alone Ringo Starr? But on top of that, the thing with Spotify is it's an even playing field, right? So it's also not entirely true, because people who get millions of streams actually make more per stream than the person like me who only gets tens or hundreds of streams. So actually it's still not true. Famous people are still making more money off Spotify. And also it's all old music. Like when Madonna went over to Tidal or whatever that one was, where they broke away and they went on to another streaming platform, because they wanted more royalties. All she had on Spotify at the time was music from 35 years ago. So I'm sorry if that is still not paying out the dividends that it was 35 years ago, but it probably shouldn't be. So, think yourself lucky that you're getting anything for it, Madonna, and stop complaining. I think that by evening the playing field and by putting everything out there on a streaming platform where everyone can make something for their time and effort, even if it's pennies, that is way better than the idea of all of us trying to go cap in hand to a corporation who are only looking for, whatever the next big thing is for 14-year-olds and are not really interested in anyone over the 20-year-old vein. So I would say that about Spotify. So it gave me a chance where other platforms wouldn't. The other thing is on Spotify is once you find a few bands, so let's say you find Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures and then you find a few other indie bands that are really kind of what you're looking for in terms of music, in terms of new music, the more you listen to it, the more Spotify will suggest other indie bands or other bands similar to you. And while a lot of people kind of go, oh, I don't like it that Spotify is watching what I listen to, it's 2020. Give up on that, because that's not changing. Everyone knows everything right now. Just you have to accept that and move on. And also, it has allowed me to literally form playlist after playlist on Spotify of other new music or other indie music or even other rock and folk music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that I wouldn't have heard otherwise based on my listening. And it has expanded my music, certainly in my late 30s and now my 40s. It has expanded my music taste way larger than it ever would have if I had to go to a record shop every week. And that's nothing against record shops. I love record shops. But in terms of finding new music, Spotify has been a godsend. The only other thing I would suggest people do is find that music blog, and there are a few out there. If you Google top 10 music blogs or whatever to follow, you'll come up with them very quickly. But find that music blog that you like, find them on social or find them on their websites, and listen to what they are suggesting regularly. You're not going to like everything, but what's best about these indie artists is the moment you hear a song where you're like, oh my God, I'm really loving this, you go to Spotify based on that track, or you go to iHeartMusic, or you go to Bandcamp, or you go wherever you go to these platforms. I guarantee you there will be at least 2 or 3 albums or 2 or 3 whatever that band has put out that will again give you another 10 tracks you can get into. So while it is a little bit of work on the user's end, there are so many avenues now, I think, for people to discover indie music. And we need to, the last thing I'll say, and I know I've ranted on, but the last thing I will say is, if you find an indie band you like, and it doesn't have to be Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, it can be anything, support them, retweet them, like them, comment, share, tell your friends and family about them, pay for an album. Normally the albums are between $5 and $10. We're not talking, lots of money here. Stream them on Spotify, tweet about them, whatever it is, because those guys, in order for them to even play within the lowest tier of the big boys, they need grassroots support. So that's all I would ask is that people do that once they come across music they like, and that can be in any genre. It doesn't have to be mine. But anyway, that's my big music. No,
I'm glad you said that, because I think it is important. I mean, I'm just getting into Spotify now. I finally put this podcast on Spotify last week, so I am like just learning about it. And then when you were posting about Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, because I was going to get it on Bandcamp, but now I'm thinking, well, Spotify, if I already got it for my podcast, it's easier to just do this. But it sounds like, I from what I hear, a lot of people do Spotify. That seems to be more of a popular thing, and so it's kind of an easy thing that once, like you said, once you find out one band, then you let the algorithm take you through it. And it's kind of the same thing like people do with like Tubi or one of those streaming services for movies. You watch a movie you really like, then you let it suggest some other things. And yes, there is a bit of a Big Brother quality to it for sure. I mean, I think it's scarier for me when I go on, Amazon, I'm looking for a present for my wife's birthday, and then 2 days later, I'm looking at my email account and there's an advertisement for Amazon for the item that I was looking at for her. That scares me a little bit more than going to a service like Spotify that I know full well what I'm putting myself in for, where I'm saying like, okay, use your algorithm to help me out, and find, like you said, finding more indie bands, because I think that's one of the problems that a lot of us our age have, is that we're used to growing up. You'd watch like 120 minutes on MTV, and you'd get this whole group of different music, different bands that MTV didn't usually play during the day, even though MTV was still playing music at all back then. It was in the 90s, they were still playing music. But I could watch 120 minutes on a Sunday night, get a whole bunch of bands, and then go to my record store and look up those bands and see, and then maybe the person behind the counter would say, oh, if you like them, you should check this person out, or maybe strike up a conversation with somebody else at the store. We don't really have that anymore. We don't have that those kinds of showcases like that on TV in popular music like that. So you really do have to kind of, like you said, dig a little bit. But I think if you can let something like Spotify give you some ideas, or like, iHeartRadio gave me some bands when I was, because I just, made, you just type in Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures on iHeartRadio. It plays one of your songs first, and then it starts playing other people's songs. It's sort of like a playlist type thing. And so you can be like, oh, I like this one. Okay, maybe I'll write this one down. And, yes, of course, means having a pen and paper, or, your iPhone or something open to type the notes in. But at the same time, it's kind of the same thing that you did when you watched MTV and 120 minutes and you got, oh, look at this, this group called The Prodigy. I'd never heard of them before. I'm going to go buy them. And then suddenly everybody knows them. So that was a little different. But it was kind of that idea, with that kind of thing.
No, definitely. I had a friend who was a real record store guy, and he would be up in Edinburgh. This was back when we were in university. He was back up in Edinburgh, and I was down south. And we were both record store guys. We used to literally make mixtapes for each other. We'd been best friends since we were 6, and we're still best friends now. And we would mail mixtapes to each other, literally of this is what we're listening to right now. And I remember in probably about 99 him sending me a tape that had Telephone Call from Istanbul on it by Tom Waits, and going down to my local record store, finding Frank's Wild Years, which is the album that song appeared on, and thinking to myself, if I like that one song, chances are I'll like the album, and buying that album, and then going home, listening to that album 150 times, and then going back to the record store and buying everything that had Tom Waits' name on it. And you know, that was how we used to do it back in the day, whether it's MTV, whether it was word of mouth, whether it was what your parents or your brother and sister or whoever were listening to. That's how you used to do it. Nowadays, or if you had a particularly good record store guy, like we had a Ben's Collectors Records in Guildford in England that used to, Ben would be like, oh, hey, you're buying the new, Tom Petty album. If you like that, you'll like these 3 bands. He was really good at doing that. But ultimately with Spotify or iHeartRadio or any of the streaming services, like you say, the algorithm allows you to really find a whole bunch of other music that's like that. And at least it's based on data you're entering in. The scary thing with the Amazon Facebook thing, where you start to see Facebook ads for stuff you just searched for on Amazon, is I've started getting emails from Amazon and stuff on Facebook from stuff that I hadn't even searched for, that I was talking to my wife about, and that my phone was listening to me based on. So that's far scarier than me going to Spotify and saying, I like Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, The Tragically Hip, these bands, please give me other bands like them. And what I do on Spotify, which doesn't even require me to have a pen and paper or even a notepad on my phone or anything, is this: I stream that every week. I use it all the time, Spotify. So every week, Spotify creates an individual playlist called Your Discover Weekly, which it fills with about 30 songs that it thinks you might like. I listen to that Discover Weekly from start to finish on a Monday or a Tuesday, and every song I like the song, and then I put it into a new playlist I've created, which I call like one-off favorites, or updated good songs or whatever, like just a dumb repository. I just call it whatever, just one-offs, go ahead. And I dump the songs in there, and then when I've built up about 50 or 60 songs, that becomes like my playlist for the month, and I just stick that on shuffle, and I know that wherever I go, I'm going to be listening to music I like. So they're really making it very, very easy, along with, like I say, find a couple of blogs that seem reliable to you, follow them on social, and just every time they post a Spotify or SoundCloud or YouTube link, listen in 30 seconds of it. You'll know straight away whether you like the song or not, and add them to your Spotify. And don't be afraid to add people on Spotify and then take them off if you don't like them after a while. If you like them because it was that moment, but a year from now you think, oh, I've had enough of them. That's the freedom of it. And I've discovered so much great music that way. And, Kim and I have been to see so many great bands in New York because of this stuff. And it's a modern way to do it, but the old traditional ways work as well. Word of mouth works, which is essentially on social, sharing something, liking something, commenting on something. I've literally had friends of mine when I've said to them, please, could you just share? You don't even have to listen, just hit the share button. And they go, yeah, but that doesn't really do anything, does it? And I'm like, actually, it does. If nothing else, the algorithms on social media are such that the more people who interact with a piece of content, whether that's liking, sharing, retweeting, whatever it is, the more people who interact with it, the more people see it in their timeline. So even if you couldn't care less, hit that heart button, hit that retweet button. If you like the person, know the person, and want to help them out, it really does do way more for a podcast or a musician or a blogger or a YouTuber, whatever it is, than just be ignoring it or thinking, John knows I look at his stuff. that's great. It's great that I know that you look at my stuff, but share it, because even if you don't want to listen, one of your friends or family might, and it helps podcasters, it helps writers, it helps musicians, it helps anyone, just my whole thing in this day and age, of stress and torment and social anger and everything that's going on right now. My thing is, it is so easy. It's easier now than ever before to spread a bit of love. It's easier now than ever before to share an accomplishment of someone else. We never had this ability before. So when you're about to write that angry post about whatever political thing or religious thing or whatever is upsetting you today, stop, go find someone you like and just tell them that you like something they're doing and share it. That's so much a better, positive way to interact with social media. It really is. I try and do that myself, and it has only helped me to find, friends like yourself, Matt, and others who are in this podcasting, music, writing, film loving game, whatever it is. It's just made my life so much better to interact with the world that way than in a negative way, even though we all succumb to negativity from now on.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's easy on Twitter or something when you have like a bad opinion, or even just like an angry opinion, just to kind of put it out there. But I think you make a good point, because you always see like independent, you like small businesses will say, they'll put things out there in small business, how to support us without spending any money, like our posts, like us on social media, share, retweet, all of those kinds of things. And I think it's true for everything. And it is one of those things, like, with my direct to video Instagram now, I don't follow a lot of like famous people on there. I think Casper Van Dien is actually the only one that I follow, and that's because he shared one of my pictures. I think he's the only, but everybody else I follow.
That should be your tagline on Twitter. Yes. Casper Van Dien is the only famous person I follow.
The only famous person on Instagram that I follow. And it is that kind of that idea where it's like, part of it is that there are some companies or something that I'll follow, and it's like, well, if I like their post, they're not really going to go and like mine back. And that's, and I'm not necessarily liking somebody's post just so they like mine back. But I think there is a part of it where you feel like, if I'm following an independent filmmaker who's like really just trying to scratch and claw to kind of get their micro budget film out, and I like their post and sort of add to that, it feels a little bit better than if I'm liking, Universal Pictures, Marvel movie, which I'm not trying to knock Marvel movies at all, but I'm just saying, like, they've got plenty of support. They don't need my support, whereas it does feel better to do it that way for sure.
Yeah, no, completely. And I'm of that mindset as well, especially as a film site, aftermoviediner.com, that more often than not is reviewing the I wouldn't say like completely independent, but the second tier stuff, the indie stuff, the genre stuff, I just did a thing on VFW where I interviewed William Sadler and also reviewed the film as well. And every time I shared it, Joe Begos, who wrote and directed that film, who I've loved since damn it, I'm going to forget, Mind's Eye or something. I forget what it was called, but he did a really cool, it was like a horror version of the X-Men, was one of his first movies, and I really loved that. But I every time I put that out on Twitter, he shared it and retweeted it, and and I followed him and things like that. And I just think that's the bond and the contract that we should all be making with each other. It's weird. It's weird because people still are in a MySpace mindset, and I'll quickly explain that. On MySpace, you could curate your timeline or your page. Mm-hmm. You could put GIFs on it and colors on it and change the photos and the looks and the different panels, and that it was very creative in that regard. And people became very protective of what was on their timeline, because when someone went to look at you or talk to you, they were going to your page to look at it and talk to it. And people became very protective about what they put on there, because they felt that everything that you put on there some way represented you fully. The way people engage with Twitter and Facebook is completely different. That very rarely are you going to an individual's profile or an individual's a Twitter feed. Mostly you're going through your own timeline in which you're just being fed content or tweets or messages or whatever it is. Yet I've literally been told by other people in the blogging and podcasting game, which is totally fine. This is entirely up to them. I'm not knocking anyone, but I've been told, would you mind if we didn't post that on our personal timelines, but instead kind of put it on our page or whatever? We just like to curate our personal timelines. And it's such a funny behavior because no one's going to your personal timeline. Nobody gives a monkeys really what my cover photo is or what my about info is. Nobody cares. They're either seeing your content or they're not, and they're seeing your content based on how many people interact with it. So on Facebook, I can post it on my After Movie Diner page and then share it to my personal timeline and a couple of groups that I have. But ultimately, if no one else does anything with it, no one else sees it. People really have to like it and share it and interact with it. And that can be either on the page or on my timeline or on my group. And the funny thing is that when people are going through their timelines, they don't know where the post is unless they look at it. They just see the post and they like it and share it, or they like it and comment. They don't care if it's come from my page, my group, or my individual user. So, it's very odd, though, how people want to curate what content they share. I say bollocks to that. Stop curating anything. Share the shit that your friends are doing, because whether you like it or not, I guarantee it makes their day. I guarantee it makes their day. Posting a negative or even impassioned political statement is not making anyone else happier, more intelligent, more knowledgeable, more anything. You may be preaching to the choir and you may get a lot of people cathartically agreeing with you and kind of saying, yeah, I hate this BS too. But ultimately, it's not making anyone's day better. You share that tweet, or you retweet that thing, you share that content, you tell someone you like their music, you get a Spotify stream, you get a podcast listen, whatever it is. That makes that creator's day. It just does. So please keep doing it. I'm very passionate about this. And it's not just because I'm a creator. I'm passionate about other creators as well, whether it's independent filmmakers or, sports writers even, or whatever. Whoever's out there trying to do their own thing, we all need to rally around and help them. It's really the only way. We're all small businesses. And if you don't come through our door and at least tell us that you like what we're selling or what we're creating, it doesn't do anyone any help. Wearing a t-shirt or having a sticker on your car that says I support small business means nothing unless you're actually supporting small business. So and we're all small businesses. So that's how I see it anyway.
No, I totally agree. I mean, people who do think they need to curate their Facebook pages, they should take a look sometimes at their stats and see how many people have actually visited their page. Right. I think mine is like, maybe if it's like one would be like 1,000% more than the past month if I had one view. So yeah, I mean, people should look at those stats and see that. And same thing with Twitter. It's like most of the time, and the thing too with Twitter that's so great, it's kind of similar to Instagram, where it's like if you like somebody's tweet, even if you just like their tweet, there's a good chance that if you like that tweet, it will show up on somebody else's timeline who interacts 100%. With you. Yeah, and it really is a good way, and I agree with you. I mean, I think for me the political thing, it's like if somebody makes a really funny political comment or something like that, sometimes I'll go to want to reply to it, and I'll just think of this, I'll spend like an hour thinking of a good reply to make, and it just kind of gets me bogged down in that, where it's like if I'm just going through my dash and just retweeting things and liking things, there's no real, like, I don't get stressed out, I don't get my blood pressure doesn't really go up at all. At the best, I'm going to get some nice smiles, laughing, and things like that. So you're right, it is a more positive way. I mean, yes, there are messages we need to get out, political messages that are important. It's important to get the word out about bad things that are happening in society. But yeah, I agree with you there that, if you spend an hour going through your dash and liking and retweeting things from people that are trying to get music out, get movies out, other blogs, other podcasts, it's a better hour spent than an hour spent trying to craft the perfect 200 word or character response to somebody's political thing.
We have 24-hour news channels. We have every single nightly show does political comedy. There are any number of satirical political shows that are out there. There are any number of people on Twitter and on Facebook you can follow who are politically savvy, who are letting people know about the world. And I that's not to say I don't agree with you. I do agree with you that the knowledge is power, and messaging about certain injustices and things needs to happen. But ultimately, when I go out into the world, and I mute a lot of that on almost all my feeds, when I go out into the world, I'm still seeing it and I'm still hearing it. So it's funny. I do not engage with the news. And yet, if you ask me about something that's happening, I will know a little bit about it, because you cannot help but know a little bit about it. However, when it's an individual artist or a blog or a website or a podcast or something, unless someone has come up to me and said, John, have you heard about this great podcast, or have you heard about this great band? I haven't, because the 24-hour news cycle is not telling me about it. The trending topics on Twitter are not telling me about it. The paid for advertisement on Facebook is not telling me about it. All the stuff that is bombarding me, whether I mute it or not, is not telling me about it. What's telling me about it is my channel of friends and people I follow to tell me about this stuff. And I do that very purposely to keep up on the latest music or the latest podcast. And even I need to go to like the last couple of weeks while I've been putting out my own stuff, I've been going through Reddit forums, I've been going through Twitter chats, I've been going through music blogs, and not just so that they find my stuff, but also so that I support other indie artists. I've been watching what blogs have been putting out. I've been listening to on Spotify. I've been following. I've been retweeting. I've been sharing. That that activity will only breed more activity for you. Any social media person worth their salt will tell you that you can post all the salesy stuff you like, buy my thing, do this thing, go to this blog, listen to this, whatever it is. And I do that. We all do that. But the best use of social media is interaction. It's commenting, it's liking, it's sharing, it's telling stories, it's word of mouth. It's what we're doing right now, Matt. It's sharing opinions. That's the best way to and it doesn't take any time at all to listen to something on YouTube or Spotify and just say to the person, hey, well done. My cup of tea. Great. Whatever. Just well done. Thumbs up. Keep at it. It just makes someone's day. And it's 3 words. And it's the best thing ever.
And it's good for us too. It's good for I don't say our souls. I don't know if that's too drippy to say it's for our souls, but at least for our blood pressure, for our overall well-being, I think you feel it's easy to get bogged down into do this kind of political stuff and it's easy to kind of get stuck in it, whereas you feel like you've done something good if an indie movie comes out and you retweet it, or you do a review on it and that person's involved, or like you talked about doing the podcast that you did on VFW and they're saying like, this is great, you're getting my movie out here. It feels like you're doing something positive, and it feels like I think you can get that endorphin rush, that positive. I think it's better for us, for our well-being than I think with what's been happening politically in this country, even beyond just the past 4 years, even beyond that, it's easy to get your blood boiling about an issue and to get bogged down in it, and to just kind of, and of course, if you're drinking coffee or something, like I tend to drink a little too much coffee, it's really easy to get worked up. Whereas like it is so much nicer to be like, okay, Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, let me retweet that, or this movie here, I just reviewed another movie from this director, let me retweet that, and something like that. And I think they appreciate it more too. Obviously, they're going to appreciate it more than some political reporter hack guy who was, I don't want to say hack, he might not be a hack, but you know what I mean, like some
He's
political
most
guy
likely going to be a hack.
Right, exactly. And it's like he's got thousands of followers and everybody's replying and nobody really cares, and
right.
and so
it's Schadenfreude and catharsis. It's train wrecked news. We have the local news on in the morning as I'm getting ready for work because Kim, my wife, likes to watch it, and that's absolutely fine. But every other story is this person was stabbed, this person was shot, this place was broken into, this thing. And I'm like, New York's a city of 9 million people. I assume those things may be happening. But if you're reporting on one dude who was stabbed in the Bronx out of a city of 9 million people, like, that to me is not new. It's not news that someone stole a car in Manhattan. That's not new. And I'm sorry for the person whose car was stolen, but it's not fucking new. It's just not news. News is like, for me as a New Yorker, like, news is about the traffic. It's about the subway. It's about the mayor or about some political thing. It's about, like, why don't talk about all the buildings that are being torn down and the luxury condos that are being put up and the increase in homelessness or whatever it is. There's plenty of news. Someone being punched or stabbed is literally only meant to make you feel more fearful about the world. And for all the bad stuff that's going on right now, and I'm really not trying to downplay it, but for all the bad stuff in the world, the only antidote is really to try and live a positive life. Yes, you can vote. I encourage everyone to vote. Yes, you can obviously share your opinions with others, but ultimately live a positive life. Open a door for someone. Say please and thank you. Share something someone's written. Hug a friend, whatever it is. It sounds so trite, but it's honestly, that's the revolution. That's the revolution. I don't care how many marches or Twitter trending topics or whatever it is there is. The true revolution will come from how many individuals we can touch in our daily lives and be good people about it. And I'm beginning to sound preachy now, but I genuinely mean it and I genuinely feel it. Like I said before, you cannot guarantee that any sort of political activity that you engage in is necessarily going to change anyone else's mind. Most likely it's only going to reaffirm what other people feel, and mostly it's negative things that people are sharing, so you're not necessarily making the world a better place. If you like or share something that someone has created, you make their life better. If you make their life better, chances are they're going to be in a better mood that day and they're going to make someone else's life better. Chances are those other people who are then made better by that person will then make their spouse or their child or whatever feel better because they're in a better mood. It's contagious. If you don't do it and you just hang on to the negativity in the world, then really that's all you're carrying around with you and you're not helping anybody else. Random acts of kindness really do have a wonderful positive knock-on effect, and they are also way more prevalent than people like to talk about. The comments I get, the shares I get, the likes I get, the friends I've made. I've not necessarily made myself rich or famous or anything like that from doing podcasting, doing the Aftermove Down, or anything like that. But I have made friends that I will have for the rest of my life that have enriched my life in a way that I could never, ever get in any other way, all just by putting myself out there. So that's the wealth I get from it. And that's why I'm always happy to support other people and do what we do. I just think it's a much better way to live, and I'm trying really hard to practice what I preach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it does have to do too with kind of like the this kind of thing, podcasting, blogging, those kind of things, people writing reviews and things like that, where we're all doing this, none of us are really making money off of it. We're just kind of doing it, because we care about these movies and we care about this thing. But it does feel better when you put out a podcast and people listen and they comment on it and say it was great, or, even just commenting and saying, hey, I like that one, but could you cover this next time? Or, could you, oh, I love it if you talk about this. It does. It's an easy way to be positive. And yeah, it doesn't mean, you don't have to be going on somebody's YouTube live stream and some famous YouTuber and donating $100 to them. It's much cheaper. Keep your $100 and just, share, that kind of thing. And I think you're right. There's so many avenues with which to be positive that it's a much easier way to do it. It's somebody makes a review, maybe you don't agree with the review. I think in the past for me, I would kind of get into it with people that I didn't agree with their review, and I'd want to, kind of say how I thought about it or whatever. And I realize now it's like, no, you know what? We disagree on the movie, but at least we're talking about the movie. And I think
right.
sometimes that's enough. Sometimes, if somebody didn't agree with what Mitch and I thought about when he was on recently when we did Altitude, the Dolph Lundgren movie. Some people didn't agree that we liked it. That's okay. You don't like it. It wasn't for you. We kind of graded it on a curve as a DTV movie anyway. So, we kind of were maybe a little easier. But, that's okay. I'm just appreciated that you listened to the podcast. I'm happy that you listened to it. And that's okay if you didn't agree. That's perfectly fine with me.
Oh, any feedback is good feedback. Really, it is. As long as you're not nasty about it, be constructive. Just don't be nasty about it. Mm-hmm. I will finish this section of the conversation with one story that's very personal, but awesome and shows exactly what I'm talking about. So I started this podcast, blogging, After Movie Dino website about 9 years ago, and about I forget exactly when it was now, probably about 7 years ago now, my ex-wife left me and I lost my job, and I couldn't stay in the apartment I was in anymore. Anyway, ended up moving into a flat and sorting myself out and getting a job, and everything was going along. And I was doing the podcast still, and I was being very open and honest on the podcast, and I was reviewing films on the website, and it really kept me going. Out of the blue, Gary Hill, someone who follows me on social and someone who is now a dear friend, but out of the blue, someone who followed me on social and listened to the podcast and had always been supportive, sent me a ukulele signed by the cast of Phantasm. Out of nowhere.
That's amazing.
Just mailed it to me. Didn't even tell me. Just got my address, mailed it to me in the Bronx where I was living at the time, and sent it to me by the cast of Phantasm, and then started to send me on social all these videos of Bill Thornbury and Reggie Bannister playing it and signing it and stuff like that. And it chokes me up even now talking about it. It was the greatest gift. A few months after that, or not even a few months, a couple of months after that was happening, I connected with my a woman on a dating app. Immediately got on a phone call with her because we were really jibing in our text messaging and really getting along well. So immediately jumped on a phone call. And while I was on the phone call, I mentioned that a friend of mine had sent me this ukulele signed by the cast of Phantasm. And I immediately said, "I'm sure you don't know what Phantasm is." And she went, "Do you mean Reggie the Tall Man?" And so on. I love those movies. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And she was like, "Yeah, I love those movies." And we talked about the Phantasm series, and it was fantastic. The very next day we went on our first date, fell in love at first sight, and 5 years later she's my wife, and it's phenomenal. And at my wedding, I played a brand new song that I had written to her on that very ukulele, told that story, and now that song is available on my new album. So there we go. From simply starting a podcast and going through some bad times, and because a random act of kindness saved me in the darkness, and I decided to mention it to a woman that I had only just met over the phone, I feel like that through line and that positivity and that love got me to where I am now, very happily married with a brand new album out and having a wonderful chat with an old friend who, again, I made podcasting through our mutual friend Mo Porn. So it all ties together for me, and it's you put good stuff in and good stuff comes back to you. Even if it's not monetary, it could be literally saving your soul. So there we go. That's a wonderful story that should encourage everyone to be more positive.
That is an amazing story, because I think, when I was doing the podcast with you and Mo that time, I think I just moved to Pennsylvania, and I had met my wife Jen like probably about 6 months before that. And I think that was so because I think you got married soon after. I think it was like a year after I did, because I remember seeing the posts on Instagram. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing kind of how that, how we start this thing out, this podcast thing, and we're just kind of doing, and like you said, somebody sends you a gift, and which is amazing, that you kind of do this thing not expecting to have those kind of connections. I think that was something for me when I first started doing this. I didn't expect to meet people like yourself or Mo or anybody else. I didn't expect to do that kind of thing. I didn't expect it to really have a reach beyond my friends. I didn't think anybody beyond my friends would want to be reading about these movies that I was talking about. And suddenly it turns into this bigger thing. And like in your case, I mean, it's even more amazing that you met your wife through. I mean, I guess I met Jen actually through Tumblr, blogging on Tumblr. So
right, yeah.
So it gets in a similar way, right? I had gotten it. I was doing Blogger, and then a woman I work with, a girl I work with, turned me on to Tumblr, so I started doing Tumblr, and that was how I met Jen. So it is kind of amazing how this thing goes like this. I was thinking about it too, as we get into talking about the movies here, that if there was a direct-to-video connoisseur trivia game or something like that, I think you'd be the answer to like 3 different questions, because you along with Mo were instrumental in this podcast even happening, because after I was on Mo's show with you guys were like, hey, we're doing this podcasting night. This was like, I guess, back in 2014. We'd love for you to do a show, and so that's how I got started doing this show.
Yeah.
You're also the only person other than Jamie to actually host the show before, because you hosted while I was getting married in 2014, the 2 episodes where I was out, and of course.
Oh yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that. Yes, I did. Yeah,
of course, TalkShoe had a problem with their server, so I've got to get those episodes back up, because everything pre 2015 was taken down, or was lost, and so
yeah, I've lost so many. Luckily, all my After Movie Diner stuff had moved to another server by that point, but all my Mo and I did a couple of episodes of a show that never went anywhere, but I lost those. All of my crosstalk stuff is basically lost unless someone has it saved somewhere. Yeah. So yeah, I lost a bunch of stuff, and all that. While it was very exciting at the time, the different groups and channels we tried to be on, weirdly enough, those podcasting nights kind of ended up being a sort of failure. We then moved over to Mixlr and did our own thing for a while, which was wonderful. But again, that was back when I was by myself living in the Bronx, and I had a lot more time.
Right. Well, that was the thing, I think, with the Mixlr night, was that it was one night. It was always Wednesday nights. And so I know for me, like, one thing is I could only really get guests that were on the East Coast, because it was too early for West Coast. It was not a good time for England. It was like 2 a.m. for England. It was not a good time for Australia or wherever. So that was one thing. But then also, yeah, it was like, okay, so if Jamie and I couldn't do a Wednesday night, that was it. The episode was out. Whereas like now it's like, I can, tonight we just kind of oh, hey, does tonight work? It works. Perfect. And I could just kind of be a little bit more flexible, which helps there too. But yeah, and then of course the third trivia question that you would be the answer to is that you, John, are the person who created our theme song for this show, which is really great. I think I was trying to remember how it came about, because I think Mo, when I was first doing the podcast, he came to me that first night or close to the first night and said, do you have a theme song? And I was like, well, I was going to use Mr. Big's Strike Like Lightning, because it's, it's very action-y kind of song. He was like, you can't do somebody else's song for your theme song. It's got to be, this
was when we were on FDTC or whatever that.
Right, I believe
channel.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I can't remember if he asked you or if I asked you, but yeah, you came back with the theme song, and that's the one we're still using, which is fantastic. I mean, I love it. It's great. I just sort of, what I do, because I'm not very high tech. I'm going to probably try to get some better equipment, but right now I just kind of use, I just kind of join the audio together. So I just put the theme song in, after and all that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, it's been really great. It's really great having you on here. I mean, I was trying to think of a good, I don't want to say pitch is the right term, but I think it was like, once I came out of hiatus and I realized, like, okay, I proved to myself that I was doing this again. I think that was the biggest thing, is I needed to prove to myself that, okay, if I'm back, I don't want to just start telling everybody I'm back and let's just do everything and then suddenly, not make it to appointments or things like that I was scheduling with people. So I had to prove to myself that I was going to be back. But then once that happened, it's like, okay, now let's start to ask people to be on the podcast. And I was like, well, if I'm, I was thinking about having you on, and I was like, well, what would be like the pitch, or what would, be the kind of the show idea? And then I posted about the message, and you're like, yeah, I went through a phase of watching these, these Fred Williamson movies. And I was like, oh man, that'd be great. Cause as I was saying to you before, I was looking to get into more Fred Williamson movies. And the problem was that with the blog, where I only do a post every week, I tend to skew more towards the Williamson's later stuff, because he's doing that with other actors, like like we were talking about Gary Busey or Cynthia Rothrock or whoever is in these movies, and they aren't as good, of course, as the Hammer stuff, but it just sort of ends up being like, okay, I've got 3 actors that are in the Direct-to-Video Hall of Fame in this movie, let's just do this one instead. So then when I was like, oh, what are some other ideas, and you're like, hey, why don't you have me on the show? I was like, Well, perfect. Because I was trying to think. I had some ideas like maybe having you come on to talk about ninja movies because I remember you did the Ninja-vember before, or something like that. And so then I was like, okay, well, no, you've got the pitch because I don't know about you, but I think it's always a tough thing when somebody wants me to be on their show and they're just like they don't have an idea of what the show is about.
Right.
And it's kind of like, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? Like elite politics in Cote d'Ivoire or something like that? Like, what are we going to discuss on this show? And so I always try to have an idea when I ask somebody to come on. So you came up with the idea, which was perfect. And I also appreciated your idea because One Down, Two to Go for me, I think, is the direct-to-video one out of these two. It's the one that really has that feel of kind of, I don't know if proto-direct-to-video is the term you want to use, but it's like kind of when direct-to-video was first starting in the 80s, this was the kind of movie, where it's like it didn't really do much in the theater. Charles Band's Media Home Entertainment picks it up and it gets distributed. And when you suggested, well, if you're going to do that one, you really should do Three the Hard Way as well. Seeing them both together, I definitely agree. I think anybody who's looking to do these movies, they should do them together and do them at the same time.
Yeah, and they're not long movies. I think Three the Hard Way is about 80 minutes, and I think One Down, Two to Go is, I think, about 70 minutes. Yeah. And Three the Hard Way really is just as, and I'm going to call it blaxploitation just as it's a good catch-all phrase. Essentially, I mean early 70s African-American filmmaking, and we can talk about the word blaxploitation in a minute. But Three the Hard Way, essentially, it doesn't come quite at the end as the bubble is bursting on that, because that's around 75, 76 when Hollywood really turns its back on those films. But it's certainly the movie where each of its stars, Jim Kelly, Fred Williamson, and Jim Brown, have each had their own individual successes. And this is the film where they all kind of join forces and meet together and come together as sort of an attempt to, sort of like what Stallone said about The Expendables. He was like, when we all came back to action filmmaking, none of us could open a movie by ourselves anymore. But if we stuffed all of us in one film, then our combined, buying power, whatever, selling power, whatever, would actually get bums in seats. I'm not quite sure that Three the Hard Way was quite at that point. I think had it only had one or two of them in it, it still would have been a success. But this was a Warner produced film, because when he went ahead and did the sequel, which is the unofficial sequel, One Down, Two to Go, he actually went to Warner and asked them if he could do an official sequel, and they said they weren't interested anymore, which is why he went ahead. Fred Williamson, the Hammer, went ahead and made it himself. But yeah, Three the Hard Way was a Warner produced film, and it certainly comes at that point where Hollywood studios like Warner are putting these films out because no other film was making money the way these films were making at that time. If you read anything about Hollywood at the end of the 60s, early 70s, as the independents, the likes of obviously Dennis Hopper with Easy Rider, but then people like Scorsese and De Palma and Francis Ford Coppola and so on start making essentially independent films, successful independent films, and the studio is no longer within the studio system. The movies that literally kept the studios afloat for 5 years and allowed them to then go off and fund bigger projects were these movies that have now been dubbed blaxploitation. They were films like Shaft, like Slaughter, like The Hammer, and like Three the Hard Way. And it's almost absolutely unforgivable that these actors and performers from that time, while they've each had long careers, did not have long careers within Hollywood, who in 1975, once they'd essentially recouped their money back from their grindhouses on 42nd Street, went away and again turned their back on African-American filmmaking pretty much for 15 years till the kind of late 80s, early 90s Spike Lee wave. Any predominant African-American film you've seen since the late 80s onwards are standing on the shoulders of the work that was done by Fred Williamson, by Jim Brown, by Pam Grier, by Richard Roundtree, and so on in this period. So to denigrate it or to look down on it or to call it cheesy or to call it any kind of negative connotation, I feel does it a massive injustice.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially, that term blaxploitation. We know it's sort of a catch-all. It's sort of, and I also think it's something that the Hollywood establishment sometimes uses as a way to sort of dismiss the movies and maybe also have an excuse for not giving Jim Brown and Jim Kelly work after these. But when you watch Three the Hard Way, there's nothing exploitative about the movie. I mean, these are African-American men who are portrayed as very affluent, very sophisticated. They have, for lack of a better term, Liam Neeson with a certain set of skills, right, that make them able to take care of business in this movie. And then, of course, you also look at the fact that you've got Gordon Parks Jr. directing it. And I can't remember the name, but the cinematographer, I looked, he worked on The Wild Bunch with Sam Peckinpah. So, you've got real talents doing this movie. And I mean, of course, it looks like that. I mean, I think 1 Down, 2 to Go. That's where Williamson. I think he learned a lot from Italy, from Enzo Castellari and them, because there was almost a feel of that movie having a little bit more of that kind of a movie feel, where it's just let's get it done, let's get it out there. But part of the reason I think Fred Williamson, I think he knew what he was. As an actor, as a person making movies, he kind of understood that. Jim Brown, say what you want about the domestic violence in his past, but as an actor, he was considered maybe somebody who was underrated as an actor, which he maybe shouldn't have been. But he was someone who could do really good dramatic parts. He wasn't just a football player doing action movies. And then Jim Kelly really was a high level martial artist who. Yes, Fred Williamson knew martial arts too, but Jim Kelly was somebody who should have been, kind of following in the footsteps of Bruce Lee and doing those kinds of movies. And then Richard Roundtree, he brings Richard Roundtree in as well for this, where, Richard Roundtree has that kind of real, screen presence that you look for in a leading man in a movie, where he just sort of takes over a scene that he's in and just suddenly looks bigger and better than everybody else on the screen. And I think Williamson looked at it as these three should not be in one of my Hammer production movies. These are my Italian movies, my Italian produced movies that I'm making kind of on the cheap, where, yes, they're good movies. These, I think he kind of comes from that school of Italy where it still looks like a movie, but you're doing the scenes as quickly as possible and getting it done. And I think his mindset was, they shouldn't be in my movie. They should be doing big Hollywood productions. Hollywood should be knocking down their door and giving them as many scripts as possible. And when he realized he couldn't do that, I think he was like, okay, I've got to make a movie for them. And hopefully if I make this movie for them, maybe it gets their names out there a little bit more. And unfortunately, it didn't end up happening for them. That they were still doing sort of these kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term at this point, it's still not quite direct to video, but that was kind of what they ended up doing. I mean, Canon comes around and.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is Jim Brown and Richard Roundtree very sadly end up doing a lot of kind of police chief stuff or TV cameos. Like after 1 Down, 2 to Go comes out, Jim Brown, I think, is in a damn near every action TV show from the late 70s, early 80s onwards. And Richard Roundtree, who has something of a slightly more dignified career, I guess, in a weird way, but does end up playing either a lot of detectives or police chiefs or whatever, which sort of Fred Williamson would interestingly kind of send up in Starsky and Hutch years later. What's interesting about all of this, so a quick point on the blaxploitation thing. So what's interesting about the word blaxploitation is there are other times that we add that suffix onto words. There's Ozploitation, there's Canucksploitation, there's quite a few of them. What those words tend to mean is they tend to mean slightly heightened or excessive genre films, so action films, sex films, horror films, that kind of thing, with a slightly heightened Roger Corman-esque exploitative element, whether that's nudity or violence or gore. And most of those have been, most of those words, exploitation, Canucksploitation, whatever, are tied to either a country or to a race or to a place or to a certain group of actors or a certain group of performers or a certain genre. And they're used within the fan base as incredibly positive things. They're all very positive, affirming things. People it's funny. People talk about B movies, genre film, straight to video film, or exploitation films. These are kind of what the funny thing is, to quote Bruce Campbell, most big Hollywood movies now are B movies. If you put on a pair of tights and save Gotham City from the Joker, you're in a B movie. Like if you that's they're all B movie tropes. They're all, heightened action, heightened costumes, heightened whatever. There's exploitation elements to them. There's B movie elements to them. And so when I say blaxploitation or early 70s African American filmmaking, I mean it as that there are predominantly black actors in the films, and that the films have some element of exploitation in them, because no matter how good they are, and Three the Hard Way is a fantastic romp, it has two exploitation elements in it. One is the violence, and it's very over the top comic book cartoon violence. There's actually a running joke in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, which was a parody of it much later that Jim Brown appeared in. The fact that Fred Williamson and Jim Brown do not reload their weapons at any point in the last act of Three the Hard Way. And the second exploitation element in it is that all the white people in the film are members of a white supremacist Aryan race Nazi-like group, which, while is not true, sadly. There are those groups, unfortunately, in America. Even today, they just wear khakis rather than armbands and carry tiki torches. But still, those people exist. But having them as the only white people in the film is, it's almost like a Bond villain thing or whatever. It's kind of like an exploitation element. And I guess the third exploitation element is the fantasy element of there being a virus or a serum or something they can put in the water supply that would only kill black people. So there are certain exploitative in those movies where we were all making money. And he's right. Putting exploitation at the end of a word doesn't mean that anyone's being exploited. It means that the story elements are often exploitative story elements. So they are exploiting nudity or exploiting violence. It's not that blaxploitation means that black people were being exploited. Quite far from it. In fact, blaxploitation era was one of the most prevalent eras of African American filmmaking that America had seen up until that point. It was actually more that there were films with predominantly African American casts that had some exploitation elements. It's just that, like you have quite rightly said, that has been co-opted by a predominantly racist, negative, white Hollywood as a negative. Weirdly, they don't do the same thing with Ozploitation. Everyone fucking loves Mad Max, and Mad Max is Ozploitation. Everyone still loves Mel Gibson, even though he's a big fuck. So it's weird. Anyway, sorry, you know the point I'm making.
Well, no, I was gonna say, it is amazing when you think of, like, okay, if you're an African American actor in the 70s, that's you can't get work, but you can be an anti-Semite in the 2000s and suddenly resurrect your career as a baddie in, like, in movies, and suddenly everybody loves you again. And it's like, Mel Gibson recently acted alongside Sean Penn, Mr. Liberal, and yet here he is hanging out with, like you say, a definitely certifiable anti-Semitic woman-beating fuck who shouldn't have a career anymore, but he does. So it is what it is. And look, I get it. The more you go into people's past, the more no one stands up to scrutiny. We are talking about Jim Brown and Fred Williamson, both of whom sadly supported in 2016 our current narcissist in chief. That's true too.
So that's a problem. But the one thing I will say is, coming out of the 70s, the 5 years of affluent, predominant African-American filmmaking, the one person out of that era, whether it's, Pam Grier, Tamara Dobson, Jim Brown, Richard Roundtree, whoever, who keeps the flame alive, the audience alive, and the filmmaking alive is Fred Williamson, and you cannot underestimate the people he has both inspired and the work he did to keep that audience filter with movies. He did it by going to Italy to make a bunch of money and a bunch of subpar movies so that he could come back to the US and fund his own stuff. And he does that throughout the 80s in a way that independent filmmaking, independent producing cannot claim to have an equal to Fred Williamson. The amount of films he puts out, the amount of films he produces and directs, and the amount of films he stars in and gets money for and slogs away at is truly inspirational throughout a decade where, you know, unless you were going straight to video shelves and picking out these movies, many people didn't care, or unless it was playing in a flop house on 42nd Street, maybe. But outside of that, the fact that he keeps that going, and he keeps it going with a very simple ethos. There are a lot of people talking, especially in the light of things like Black Panther and even films like Hidden Figures and things like that, about African-American heroes and celebrating African-American heroes. Fred Williamson knew long before the so-called woke generation has had their discussions that an African-American on screen needs to be a hero. That is his political statement. He doesn't call it that. He thinks it's been a failure. When I interviewed him, he called it a failure, and I do not agree with that at all. He has these rules. He has to win the fight. If he wants to get the girl, he has to get the girl. And by the end of the film, he can't be dead. And the reason why he has those is, yes, it's ego, bravado, and so on that comes from his football playing days and also his days as being the Hammer and just who he is as a personality, which is larger than life. But it's also a political ethos. He's like, if I'm going to be on screen, I'm not going to be portraying anything that I wouldn't want my community to see me doing. My community wants to see me winning fights. They want to see me getting the girl, and they want to see me still alive and a hero at the end of the picture. And he has done that since day one, and that is a bold political statement to be making in the early 70s when he was making films. To go into a studio, he was in studio pictures. I think, is it That Man Bolt or whatever it's called, or Our Guy Bolt or whatever the one of the studio pictures was, he was in very early on. And he literally said, I am winning my fights. I do not die, and I get the girl. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm an African-American lead, and I need to be seen doing that every bit as important as James Bond is to, you know, the white community. And that's a bold political statement. And he continues that throughout his career. And that's something that I don't think gets enough light shined on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we talk, you know, I just covered, just reviewed Steve James's Riverbend, which is, you know, he didn't get, you know, many big roles. And you think about Steve James, you know, where he's in American Ninja with Michael Dudikoff. He's the one who has the martial arts skills. He's the one with the acting chops. But the studio's like, oh no, we want an all-American, you know, white boy guy to play the American Ninja. So they bring in Michael Dudikoff. And, you know, of course, there was tension on the set because, you know, rightfully so, you know, James resented that you know, he didn't get the lead, which it would have been interesting to see him in the lead. We just naturally think of Dudikoff in that lead. But, you know, when you think of the second movie, James takes it over, right? You don't think of him as the sidekick in that second movie. He's kind of there, but there is that sense of like, okay, you know, I think if he had lived past the early 90s, I think he would have started to do more of what Fred Williamson did, where, you know, I'm going to make my own movies. They're not going to give me the parts that I need. And I think that's what Fred Williamson was. You know, they weren't giving him the parts that he wanted, so he decided to make them. And I think part of it, too, was that he didn't have, you know, as an NFL player, he wasn't as big as like Jim Brown. I mean, Jim Brown, we think of, you know, I come from New England, so it's sacrilegious for me to say that anybody's better than Tom Brady. But Jim Brown was probably the best football player that ever played the sport. You know, he was that good. And, you know, again, Jim Kelly, somebody with that martial arts background, or, you know, Richard Roundtree as an actor, they really had something, I think. I don't want to say they had something to lose, but it felt like with Fred Williamson, when he made the movies, he was like, you know, I'm not the best football player, or, you know, I'm not the best actor. Jim Brown's a better actor than me, or, you know, Jim Kelly's a better martial artist than me. But I want to make movies, and I'm going to figure out the way to do it. I'm going to make it, so and in his mind, he could maybe even, okay, well, if they're not going to give me the parts, maybe I'm not, there's a reason for it too. He could say, maybe I'm not as good of an actor than somebody else for this part. So yes, I'd love to do this part, but okay, I'll see. And then he gets into movies like Inglourious Bastards and those kinds of films. And I think starts to see, like, in Italy, they're making the movies themselves. They know how to do it on a budget. They know how to make it quickly, but he can still tell the story he wants to tell, like you talked about. He can make it so that it's going to be what he wants it to be. When I think of The Messenger, I mean, that is really, it's all him as the hero, but it also has a story that he wants to tell. And I think To the Heart, it's One Down, Two to Go, I think was kind of the same thing, where it was like, he wanted to make his sequel to the movie, and Warner Brothers would make it, so it's like, okay, I'm going to make this movie, and I'm going to have the people in it who, these actors that should be getting work and they're not, and they're going to be heroes, and they're going to come into this small town in New Jersey and beat up all these really bad white guys that are in there that, they're just really despicable characters. They kind of paint them really bad, and we want to see them go in there and take care of business like that.
The wonderful Joe Spinell, who is
yes.
who is both the sweatiest but also the greatest man on screen. He always looks like he's sweaty, even if he's not. But I absolutely adore Joe Spinell, and I love that he's in this. And I believe he becomes one of the bad guys in The Big Score, or one of those. I think he worked with Fred a few times, Spinell, as did they all. I mean, they all worked with him quite a few times. And that was, again, sort of one of the things that he had on his side, was that he was friends with all these guys and they would show up for him, which I think really, really helped sell it. And he did what, to be fair, filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Smith have done in latter days, which is sell the movies abroad, go to Cannes, go to the Asian film markets, get these things sold abroad so that the movie is already in the black. Then come here and make the movie in America and sell it. And you'll end up making your money back in America on video rentals or whatever it is, but you're already in the black because you sold it overseas. That's how Kevin Smith has been able to remain independent. It's how Robert Rodriguez has been able to remain independent. But Fred was the one doing it first. He went to all of those film markets in Italy, in France, in Asia, anywhere where he could sell a picture or sell a concept or sell an idea, he did so. He tells very interesting stories about selling the Western he made with Richard Pryor, where all he had was him, Richard Pryor, and the title Adios Amigos. And he went to Cannes and sold that for like $3 million before they'd even shot a roll of film. So it's you have to be that kind, and that's where his, ego and bombast comes from. And that's why I forgive it, because, he had to go out there and pound the pavement and take meetings and say, I'm the fucking Hammer, man. Give me some money for my movie. And
right.
But like, bless him that he did, man, because they're not a winner every time out of the gate, but one in every 4 or 5 movies is a surprisingly watchable, fun action, movie. And every time you're watching one, talking about one, you're spreading the word. Again, like we started the show talking about spreading the word for these things. The few series of podcasts I've done about these movies and the blogs I've written about these movies and the interview that I did about these films, I do so. And the big, actually, when they were trying to get Old School Gangsters 2 off the ground, Original Gangsters 2, Old School Gangsters off the ground, we did a huge campaign for it, because the fact that when people like, and this is nothing against, the fact that when Spike Lee is honored, people like Samuel L. Jackson and Denzel Washington, people like that get up and talk about Spike Lee, that's fantastic. But people should be getting up and talking about Fred the Hammer Williamson, Jim Brown, Richard Roundtree, Pam Grier, and all of them are still working. They're all still doing their thing. Fred has been in 10 movies in the last 3 minutes that we've been talking. Pam Grier is fantastic on that sitcom, Bless This Mess. Her and Ed Begley Jr. are the two best things in it. Phenomenal. And Richard Roundtree I mean, don't get me started on the new Shaft, but at least it gave Richard Roundtree work, so fair enough. It shouldn't be a comedy. Shaft was never funny in that way, but modern Hollywood does not know what to do with that franchise, so it keeps ruining it. But at least it's giving him work. And if it brings people back to the original 3 films, I'll let it slide. It's fantastic that they're still kicking, but every time someone mentions either Sidney Poitier before them or the Spike Lee group after them, all of whom deserve all the praise they get, the fact that people do not mention Pam Grier, Fred Williamson, Jim Brown as being on the vanguard, being on the forefront of African-American filmmaking in a time where there was still so much civil unrest, and the fact that they were able to prove as heroes and as film stars and save studios and whatever, that is so important to talk about and doesn't get mentioned enough.
Yeah, and what I would say too is that one thing too about Pam Grier when you look at her movies is that it wasn't just that she was a strong African American, but also a strong female and leads, and it really astounded me that we went through this long period before they could even make a Wonder Woman movie with all these big comic book movies coming out, and it's like Fox had the rights to the X-Men movies for all these years, and they couldn't make a Storm movie, have her.
Don't get me started. The number of times I hear people say that strong female characters in leads have never made money in Hollywood. Yeah. I always just have to say, I'm sorry, I call bullshit, because whether it's on the big screen and it's Pam Grier, Cynthia Rothrock, or on the small screen and it's Xena, Warrior Princess, or Buffy, there has always been interest in strong, or even before that, people like Ida Lupino and people making movies back in the 40s and 50s. Look at the Rear Window. Yes. The Grace Kelly role in that. That is such, to me, the perfect representation of the strong woman, because on one hand she has all the things that people talk about as being feminine, the fashion and the shoes and the opinions and all the rest of it, and Jimmy Stewart rails against her in that movie in a jokey but also semi-serious sort of misogynistic way, and at the end of it, it's her who's coming through, helping him out, saving him from his own stupidity. And she even says, can all your shit fit in this tiny little, carry case? That to me started, those films where those actresses directly lead through, and let's not mention the Thelma Ritter in Rear Window as well. Yes. Incredible. Yeah. But there's a direct line from them through to the ass kickers of the 70s, and then the Sigourney Weavers and Linda Hamiltons of the 80s, and so on. Like there is a direct correlation throughout filmmaking. So when they start talking about, whether it's Wonder Woman or Captain Marvel or whatever, I'm like, guys, it's great. Yes, excellent, wonderful, but can we have a little perspective, please? I love how the one thing that frustrates me, and I'm not anti-woke generation, let them try and make the world nicer and kinder. Please try and make the world nicer and kinder. My problem with it all, though, is they have no sense of history, no concept of history whatsoever. And while every single era we're talking about and every single representation that we're talking about on this podcast has difficulties and has problems and has bad stories behind the scenes and has things where our heroes may crumble emotionally or morally in front of us. On the screen and in film, the story of whether it's African Americans, whether it's Asian Americans, whether it's females or whatever, that there is a direct line, and people who say that it starts with Denzel Washington, or it starts with Wonder Woman, or it starts with whatever, have no fucking idea about anything, to pardon my French.
No, it's okay. We've got the explicit tag on here, so you're fuck all you want. You can say it as much as you want. So it doesn't really cost anything to get explicit tag, but it's there. So yeah, we're definitely, you're welcome to use it. But yeah, I think, that's maybe a good point to leave this on. That I think one of the things I really love about the streaming sites right now is that, yes, we kind of rue the fact that we don't have the old video store that you could go in and look around, and that, that everything is there. But when you go to Tubi, a lot of these Fred Williamson movies from this era in the 80s are on the Shout Factory aspect of I guess they have a contract with Shout Factory or something like that. So a lot of them are there for free. Yes, you get commercials here and there, but it's a real easy way for you to support this kind of thing. I think for people, that looking for stuff to get into. I mean, I'm someone who was looking to get into this more because I knew some of these movies, I knew, about them. But like I said, I was, and I think maybe too, for me, I have to kind of understand with my blog that it's not all about clicks or views or whatever, that like, what, I just because the movie's got Gary Busey in it too, or whatever, whoever else is in it, that like, yes, it can be just Fred Williamson and yes, I mean, Fred Williamson's usually with Cameron Mitchell and Christopher Connolly or somebody like that in a lot of these movies, but I think it was a lesson for me that I need to do a better part in supporting these. I think when I came back from from my hiatus, my first thought was like, oh, I've got all these Dolphin Seagal movies I've got to get to, and I just started doing a bunch of those and realizing, what, I'm not giving enough time to these other movies. And Fred Williamson, he's in the Direct-to-Video Hall of Fame because of this kind of thing, not because of the movies he made in the 90s, but because of the contributions he made in the 70s and 80s that laid the groundwork for the Cannon films, the PM Entertainments and all of that, who kind of came in after and started making movies that sort of emulated some of that and sort of ramped up the action on 10. And I think it is I think this is a kind of movie definitely you should try to track down 3 the Hard Way before you see 1 Down 2 to Go. But there are other Hammer ones on Tubi, like The Messenger, that I strongly recommend people, if you haven't seen these, get out there and watch them, because one, like you said, I think it gives you a better perspective on what you're seeing later but also I think, like, for example, Fred Williamson, a lot of times actors don't make great directors. And a lot of times with these direct-to-video movies today, it's either an actor or a stunt coordinator or somebody like that who's directing the movie. Fred Williamson learned how to be a director. He directs well. It's not, we're not going to put him up there with like, the Scorsese or whoever, or Fellini or whoever. But, he comes from that school, I think, with those Italian directors where you just do it well. And I think that's important. I think these movies are fun, especially like you said, they don't always work. But I think even when they don't work, there's something about them that's enjoyable. And it's worth it. Now that you've got that availability on a place like Tubi to see a lot of these, get in there, search around, and I think you definitely enjoy these. I think they're a lot of fun.
Well, definitely. I think what Fred does really well as a director, actor, writer is that he knows how to get in, get out, tell the story he's telling, and move on in a fairly quick-paced, exciting way. There's a couple of things. If people are tracking down 3 the Hard Way, but then also Fred's other stuff, is I would say this: please watch them, and I'm sure your listeners do, because I'm sure they're aware of kind of the direct-to-video aesthetic. But please watch them within the budgets and eras that they were being made. If you, the 3 the Hard Way is the Fast and Furious movie of its day. It really is, right? So if you've got Jason Statham, The Rock, and Vin Diesel in a movie today, that is, Fred the Hammer Williamson, Jim Brown, and Jim Kelly. That is that. But they're not going to be as slickly produced, as high budget. They're not going to have the same kind of car chases or anything in them that something like the Fast and Furious is. But if you watch them aware that they're the Fast and Furious movies of their day, and aware that what they're doing in those films is within that era and within that budget range, as exciting as anything else happening at that time, and you watch them with a little bit of that knowledge, then I think you will get a lot more out of them. I think that when you watch them back to back, you'll see that 3 the Hard Way is definitely more of a studio picture, and 1 Down, 2 to Go is still a little bit more of an independent feel. But there isn't that much outside of the fact that Fred can't afford to have them go and shoot up a complex and blow everything up like they do in the first one, and they can't have them not globe trotting but country trotting around the country to different locations in quite the same way. In fact, 1 Down, 2 to Go was all filmed on Staten Island, but which apparently is a very versatile place to shoot a film. More people should. But even so, please, if you're watching them, resist the temptation to watch them ironically, and actually watch them for the skill and for the chutzpah that is on display, because I tell you right now, if you had to leave the filmmaking, the writing, and the shooting up to Vin Diesel, Jason Statham, and The Rock, they wouldn't come up with anything as good as One Down, Two to Go. So stripped of all of their universal backing and the billions and billions of dollars that they throw at those movies, they wouldn't be able to do it any better, if not anywhere near as good. So I would try and give the films credit for that. And my last point on the streaming thing, Matt, if I've got a moment, is the best way to look at streaming is as the old video rental racks, but in the straight to video section. And I'll very quickly explain what I mean. Three the Hard Way, it's a Warner produced studio picture from 1974. Unless you own the DVD or the Blu-ray, it is very hard to find it anywhere on streaming because a big corporation owns it and they are fucking useless when it comes to streaming. On the other hand, all the independent stuff that Fred has done with various different producers throughout the years are available on a combination of Amazon Prime, Tubi, and Brown Sugar, which is, again, Brown Sugar was a streaming app which started off the back of Fred Williamson and Pam Grier, primarily on 70s African-American films, and have subsequently moved into making their own content. So sadly, like Netflix and Hulu, their actual back cat film stuff has gone down and down in quantity. But Foxy Brown is still on there, Coffee is still on there, and there are a ton of Fred films on there as well. So I would strongly, it's not very expensive. I think it's $3 or $4 a month. Get Brown Sugar. Look on Amazon Prime, because my God, Amazon Prime is chock full. Even though I hate Amazon as much as the next lefty, Amazon Prime is chock full of B movies and straight to video movies, and it is a joy. No one's should be going on Amazon Prime to watch new films. Go on Amazon Prime. There are so many films on there. When I was doing Ninjavember and I typed Ninja Films Amazon Prime, my God, the amount of stuff that's on there. It's joyous. So I would suggest Brown Sugar, Amazon Prime, and Tubi, but know this: if they're studio financed from the 70s, like Shaft is almost impossible to find anywhere.
Yes.
If they're studio produced, you won't be able to find them. If they're independently produced, you probably will. And that ties it up neatly with what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. All these platforms, I have independent film friends who have their movies up on Amazon Prime and on other streaming services. All these platforms are so much more beneficial for the indie artist, indie filmmaker, indie musician than they are studios. Studios do not know what to do with them. I have friends who work for various different studio streaming services, and they say that they run around like headless chickens. They don't know what to do. Filmstruck comes along, and then AT&T buys Warner and shuts it all down. Warner Archive comes along, same thing happens. HBO Max is not going to solve the problem, because the biggest thing they're selling off the back of HBO Max is the Friends reunion, as if anyone gives a shit. And the Apple TV and what's the Disney Plus one, they're not giving you any independent stuff either. The independent stuff lives on streaming services like the Shout Factory, like the Tubi, like the Midnight Pulp, all of which are free, by the way. Brown Sugar, which is very cheap. And then Amazon Prime. Everyone has Amazon anyway, so just use it. Find the B movies, make lists of them, watch them. And please, please, please don't watch them ironically. Watch them with the love, care, attention, and bravado that went into getting them made in the first place.
Yes, that's perfect. I think that's a really great note to leave it on. But I also want to sort of second that one about not watching ironically, that there's a lot of fun to be had in these movies. You can get a chuckle out of things here and there, but also, I agree with you there that that these are not things to be watched ironically.
Oh, I mean, know that when Fred shows up in a limousine filled with like 17 women, all of whom have to make out with him before he walks into the thing, he knows that's a joke. He's not doing that because he's unaware. When he gives the dog a cigar at the end in the hospital, and they're all, Richard Roundtree comes in and is like, hey, there's some businessmen in China who need our help. And they're all like, nah, get out of here. You know, that's 4 dudes laughing and joking. It's why I call it the Fast and Furious franchise of its day, because you watch the Fast and Furious franchise now, and apart from the shit that's apparently going on behind the scenes, right, a lot of the movies end with them like A-Team episodes used to end, with them all patting each other on the back and smiling. Like, it's one of the charms of the thing. So when they do that, please don't go, oh, well, this is just cheesy and stupid. It's part of the fun of them, and it's part of the charm of them, and it's a genre trope. It's a cliche for a reason. You know, that's how they should end. That's how movies should end. So
I totally agree. Now, as we're wrapping up here, Jon, where can people find you on social media?
Well, I am all over social media like a fucking rash. But if you're interested, honestly, the best thing to do is to go to aftermoviediner.com. If you're interested in my film stuff, all my social links are on there, so I won't bore. Basically, wherever After Movie and Diner are written together, that's me. So I'm on Instagram as After Movie Diner. I'm on Tumblr as After Movie Diner. I'm on Twitter and Facebook as facebook.com/After Movie Diner. If you are creative and you are listening to it and you really want to be a part of what I'm trying to do, I have a great retweeters group on Twitter and a share your creative stuff here group on Facebook. So please reach out to me on one of my social platforms if you want to be a part of those, and we will retweet and share you on those platforms as often as we can. It's part of what I'm trying to do to give back to other people who are doing stuff out there. And if you're interested in the music, Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures can be found on Bandcamp and Spotify. Bandcamp for purchase, Spotify for streaming. I'm also on Deezer, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Amazon, Apple Music, all those other places to stream. But the main two are Bandcamp for purchasing and Spotify for streaming. And Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures has their own website, Misc Plum Fix, MISCPLUMBFIX.com. If you look that up, all my social for the music is on there, and I'm pretty much Miss Plum Fix wherever that shows up. So again, Twitter, Miss Plum Fix, Instagram, Miss Plum Fix. Follow, and spread the love.
Right. Excellent. Thank you again. And just quickly for me, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find us for the site. We are now, of course, if you're listening to this, you probably it's too late, but we are on Spotify and on Stitcher now finally. So in addition to iTunes, but yeah, and of course Instagram DTV Connoisseur, Facebook Direct to Video Connoisseur, and Twitter DTV Connoisseur. But Jon, thank you again for coming on. This was really a great conversation. I think I'm gonna have you on again for something. I was thinking, I know you're a hockey fan. So maybe as we get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, unfortunately for you, I'm a Bruins fan. I know you're a Maple Leafs fan. I know. I grew up a Bruins fan, so I know it's hard. So I know it's not an easy one, but I think
because for the last 2 years, the Leafs have been trounced by the Bruins in the first round. So
yeah, it's when I was growing up, they never played the Maple Leafs because they were in completely different divisions. So it was like,
right.
And so it was the Canadians were the team that were always beating the Bruins, and so I kind of I feel like Toronto, they got to get a Stanley Cup soon. So, hopefully,
They have, but my God, we have been all over the place the last few weeks. And I'm like, just as we're getting into the last 20 games in the lead up to the playoffs where they should be like pulling out everything they've got, they've kind of been like winning one, losing two, winning one, losing two. And like the two that they're losing, they're just kind of shambolically all over the ice, just not knowing what. And I'm just like, guys, seriously, you have like the youngest, fastest team out there in the league, and you're just half the time you don't even show up. Like, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, so maybe that's an idea for another podcast. Maybe we could get on and talk about a hockey movie or something like that. There's plenty of those out there, something like that. But definitely, Jon, it was a real pleasure. This is a really great conversation, and definitely have to try to set up a time to do this again soon for sure.
Oh, definitely, man. And thank you so much for rambling. And I'm sorry to everyone who listened. We didn't really talk about the films in depth, but hopefully we talked enough about the era that it encourages people to go see them. I had a great conversation, Matt, and I will come back on whenever you want and use up your time with my ramblings.
No, I appreciate it. No, thank you again. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Direct to Video Connoisseur. Bye, everyone.
When you shop at a Walmart Vision Center, you get it. You know that you'll spend a little less on stylish glasses for the whole family.
Welcome to the Vision Center. Let me know if you need help finding the perfect frames.
Hey, Mom, you were right. These glasses are cool.
Hon, they take our insurance. That means Papa's getting a new pair, too.
Whoa, glasses start at just $39. Next stop, groceries.
So you can get a little more of what you need. Find a Vision Center near you. Save money, live better. Walmart.